Topics tonight. One is the first one we'll start out with, and that's the cable franchise agreement with Charter. I feel like this is deja vu all over again. We've been doing this essentially for years, and we're back at it. So let's get an update on it. I think our attorney has got a presentation, and we'll let him get going.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor. For the record, my name is Brian Grogan, outside legal counsel for the city on this cable communications matter. I wish I had a good Yogi Berra quote to come back at the deja vu, but I can't disagree with you. We have been at this for quite some time, and anxious to get to the finish line. But as you'll see from the review tonight, there's still some issues that make it impossible for staff to recommend where we are in this document today. But let's proceed. If we could flip to the next slide. Unless, I don't know if I have screen control, I assume that, there we go. So just by way of background, we have two franchise cable operators in the city. One is Charter and one is HBC. And they were both granted back in the year 2000. Everybody can hear me okay, I hope? Okay.
Yeah, can you maybe get a little closer to Mike?
Oh, certainly. Sorry about that. I'll speak up a little bit louder. Is that better?
Yeah, that is better.
It is better.
Very courtroom voice.
Very good. So these two franchises were granted in the year 2000, and they were both for 15-year terms. So they expired in 2015, which easy math was 5 years ago. Both of the operators, HBC and Charter, requested renewal back in 2013. So they had a little bit staggered expiration dates, but essentially around the same time. Next slide. So we went ahead at that time and reviewed their performance. We looked at what we would need for our future for local programming, for public educational, governmental. We prepared a draft. We sent it out to the operators. We got that done in 2015. Both companies at the time responded to us. Next slide. We started negotiating with both Charter and HBC in 2015, and we ended up finishing rather quickly with HBC, and we granted a franchise renewal document to HBC in December of 2015. So they've already been under their new franchise now for basically the last 4+5 years or so, because it became effective in January of 2016. The city and Charter, however, have exchanged multiple versions, and multiple probably doesn't do a good job of explaining how many different draft documents have gone back and forth. We've had numerous conference calls, numerous face-to-face meetings down at the City Hall, and unfortunately we have not been able to reach a final agreement. The differences between where we are today with the Charter franchise and where we ended up in the HBC renewal are rather stark. They're virtually completely different documents at this point. Next slide. So a couple of years ago, in November of 2018, having been a little bit frustrated by the fact that we couldn't get the Charter franchise done, the city went ahead and contracted with a company called CBG Communications to do a report regarding our future needs and interests. And the purpose of this report was to allow the city to consider a more formal renewal proceeding as opposed to the informal negotiations that we have been undertaking. That report was finalized and was sent out to Charter over a year ago in March of 2019, and it was used as a basis to justify what the city had been pursuing in its negotiations. The next slide. The delays in this renewal process with Charter started early on. Charter was going through a corporate merger when they acquired the Time Warner cable systems around the country. Then they went through a restructuring to try to assimilate in the Time Warner deal. They ended up hiring new government affairs personnel, and you can see the timeline here. And the most recent delay occurred within the last year as the FCC adopted an order that essentially deregulated certain parts of cable franchising, and that order remains under appeal right now. All of those things have been another reason for delays in our negotiations. Next slide. I provided this slide not to go through all these dates, but this is the number of times that this city council or predecessor city councils have voted to extend the franchise. So we're now in year 20 of a 15-year franchise with all of these extensions having been already completed. You can see that the current extension expires at the end of this month. And one of the things that we're going to have the council address is yet another extension of Charter's current franchise, along with some direction about how you'd like staff to proceed. Next slide. So where do we sit today? We have been unable to reach agreement on the franchise. I tried to give a very high-level list of the key issues that we've got left in front of us. One of the big issues is the language regarding city code compliance. Charter's position is that it wants the cable franchise to be the governing document. So in the event there's a conflict between what the city code says and what the Charter franchise says, that the franchise would govern that conflict. The problem with that is if you were to amend your city code over the next 10 years, which is not unlikely, we could potentially have Charter operating under one set of rules under its franchise, whereas other right-of-way users may be required to comply with the city code. Our position has been rather consistent throughout our negotiations. We want the city code on right-of-way provisions to drive the discussion, and we need to retain the flexibility for future city councils to potentially amend that code if it's in the best interest of the city. We have some differences regarding indemnification. Keep in mind that this is a company that has wires in virtually every street in the city. It's very important that we have strong indemnification language. That's a topic that I have also consulted with your city attorney, Mr. Hood, on, and he has concurred that the city's position in our negotiations is one that we don't have a lot of room to move on. We have to insist on fairly robust indemnification provisions. Probably one of the bigger issues, if those aren't big enough, is some edits that the company has recently made where they do not want to be required to actually provide cable service under the franchise. Let me explain that. What they want is the right, basically the privilege to be able to provide cable service, which they say they have no plans currently to change that, but they would like the flexibility if 2 years from now or 5 years from now they decide they don't want to provide regular cable service and they would rather provide something like Netflix. They'd like the flexibility that the franchise wouldn't require them to actually provide cable service, but they still want to have the cable franchise because that gives them the authority to be in the city's streets. That's been a very difficult issue for us to agree to. We've analogized it a little bit to, asking a gas company to come in and have a gas franchise, but the gas franchise doesn't actually require the company to provide gas service. Seems somewhat superfluous to have the franchise if you're not going to provide the service for which it was granted. The company's view, however, is, look, the industry is changing rapidly. People are getting their video in a variety of different ways through the internet and what we call over the top, similar to Disney Plus or Hulu or Netflix or 100 other providers. And the company wants that flexibility to change the method of delivery. That has really been a stumbling block. Other operators have not insisted upon this. Charter seems to be one of the, maybe the only that is insisting on this as a requirement for their franchise. They are seeking to no longer provide free service to public buildings. That's something that was addressed in the most recent FCC order. The issue, though, is that that order is under appeal in federal court, and if it's overturned, what we don't want to do is write a contract here where it's a heads we lose, tails we lose scenario. We would like the contract to drive and be consistent with whatever the law is at the time. There's also a similar issue under the 621 order related to how our local programming, for example, from your city council chambers, gets back to the cable operator's head end facility. So the fiber that might transport that signal, and who would pay for that and what the cost would be for that. So there's disagreement about how that would be handled. Our objective in this whole thing has been to try to have a franchise that essentially matches what HBC agreed to, on the theory that we don't want to play favorites here. We just want two companies to have the same terms and let the marketplace dictate. Those companies can fight it out for customers. But because of these outstanding issues and a number of other issues that perhaps don't rise to this level of seriousness, we simply haven't been able to close the deal. Next slide, please. You might say, well, why don't you just go out for bid? I mean, why is this different than any other franchise that the city deals with? Steve and Monica and others on the city's staff routinely negotiate franchises and don't have these complications. Part of the reason is because the Federal Cable Act only lets you do this in two different ways. One is an informal renewal process where you just have to come to an agreement between the parties. And if one party won't agree, you sit and until the parties are able to reach mutual agreement. That's what we've been doing for those past, say, 5 years or so since we completed the HBC renewal. The only other option that the federal law allows is a formal renewal process, which dictates specific deadlines, but it's expensive and time consuming to go through because it ultimately leaves the city in the position of either having to vote up or down the renewal. In other words, if you vote down the renewal, you're essentially taking away Charter's authority then to continue to provide cable service in the city. And because the stakes are so high, Charter, not surprisingly, will take that process extraordinarily serious and will seek very detailed procedures and due process protections so that they don't have to abandon some of their facilities in town that they use to provide video service. We have long tried to avoid this formal process, but we may be in a position where in an effort to bring this to conclusion, we have to go down that road because the waiting and hoping that this will ultimately solve itself informally has just not proven successful for the parties. And I think 5 years constitutes, the good college try here for both parties to work in good faith and get a deal done. Next slide. This is just a chart that I'm not really going to go through, but it visually describes for you how simple the informal is. You either get a deal done and you cut a deal through, basically follow that line to franchise renewal, or if you're not able to reach a negotiation, then the law pushes you into this formal process. If we go to the next slide, we see that it's a lot more complicated when you get to the formal process. You have to go through many of these boxes. We would be all the way up in box number 2. We've completed that needs assessment with that company I described last year, CBG Communications. We would then have to send that together with a kind of a formal request for proposal off to the company. And that would be that arrow where it says city sets the deadline on the top row there. First, we'd take this to you as city council. You would agree that that's our formal process. We'd send it off to Charter. And then we could set a deadline for Charter's proposal. We could give them 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever we choose. Once we get their proposal, we'd have up to 4 months to decide whether to accept or reject that proposal. If we rejected it, they would then have the right to request this administrative hearing. which is a little bit like if you rejected somebody's liquor license, they'd have a right to challenge that and say, well, we think the city council got it wrong. Except in this case, you're talking about millions of dollars of facilities in the right of way. So they will take this very, very seriously. But you can see, even if through an administrative hearing, if there's parties ultimately still end up with a denial, they could then take it to federal court and ask for a further review. So this kind of complicated, expensive process is what we're trying to avoid, and yet we don't want to sit here a year from now and report back to you that we're no further along this process. By the way, most of these formal proceedings do end well before you get to the second line of this chart. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go through too much of these. I'm going to go in rapid order, but a lot of this relates to this new FCC 621 order. City council members may be familiar with the FCC's order about a year or two ago on small cells, wireless small cell facilities, where they allowed the wireless industry to use various city poles to put up small cell facilities to provide various cell services. And that was not very municipal friendly because it basically mandates things that you have to do. This FCC 621 order was the Federal Communications Commission's effort to give the cable operators some kind of similar relief from the current regulations and give them some deregulation to be as competitive as what they've allowed the cell providers to also compete under. Next slide. What this order does, and again, I'm not going to go through this in detail just in interest of your time tonight, but it really changes the way in which a cable franchise establishes what the FCC calls in-kind obligations. So historically, you guys have always received a 5% franchise fee on gross revenues derived from cable services. So if they made $100 on cable services, 5% or $5 went to the city, and that was viewed as compensation for the use of your public right-of-way. And that has not changed, and that will continue forward. But in addition to that, your franchise said, oh, and you'll provide free service to schools and public buildings. You'll transport our PEG channel from our city hall or our school district out to the head end so that it can be shown to Winona residents. You'll do other things that are considered in-kind contract obligations. The FCC order would throw many of those into doubt as to whether or not they would continue forward. As I mentioned, this FCC order is under appeal right now at the Sixth Circuit. A decision probably won't come out until next spring, just because the pandemic has slowed the courts down even more than an appeal like this would normally take. So we shouldn't be holding our breath for a quick court decision on this one. Next slide. This is just some more issues about the FCC order. I think I've probably covered this in my presentation, so I'm going to skip forward to the next slide. The FCC order contemplates that the parties are to negotiate these things within a reasonable time and then determine how best to deal with them under the franchise. As of this date, Charter hasn't issued any kind of franchise modification process with the city. It's likely because of the pandemic that Charter and other operators have not tried to implement this order yet. Seems so difficult right now for anyone to transact business under some of these trying conditions that I just think operators have avoided this. But what we're trying to do is draft the franchise to contemplate this type of procedure. And so far, that has not been something that Charter has been willing to accept. Next slide. I just provided you a citation here to the actual order itself. Also, just to note that there has been legislation introduced in both the House and the Senate called the Protecting Community Television Act, which would undo all of this FCC order. But I think we could all agree that right now there are bigger issues on Congress's plate, and they're likely not to get to this in this session. So again, I would not hold our breath that prior to a November election, we would see Congress agree on this type of legislation. Next slide. So finally, the conclusion and the issues for council discussion is, how do we really wish to proceed? Do we want to continue with our informal renewal negotiations on those issues that I described a few slides ago, things regarding the city code, the mandate to provide cable service, indemnifications provisions, and those issues? Should we keep on working at it, trying to reach renewal? Or should we proceed to a more formal process and basically say we cannot reach negotiations, come back to this council, provide you with the packet of formal materials, and send it off to charter and await their formal proposal to the city? Next slide. Our recommendation at this point, simply because we have been trying for years to reach the informal renewal, is to proceed with that formal process while continuing our efforts for informal negotiations. So let me describe what this recommendation means. We would invite continuing informal negotiations with charter, but make our position rather clear on where we can go on those final few issues. We reach a deal, great, we will bring it to the council and move forward. But assuming we're not able to get a deal done, staff would be authorized to proceed forward with this formal renewal process so that we can have them going concurrently, and that would allow us then to have some deadlines to eventually bring this process to conclusion. We very much hope to not be here at year 6 and year 7. We would like to close this out sooner rather than later. So with that, Mayor, I'll pause. I know that was a lengthy presentation. Thank you for your patience, but I'm happy to take questions.
I have a quick one for you. How long is our current agreement with HBC?
It was a 10-year renewal. 10-year renewal drafted in 2016, so it goes through 2026.
Thank you.
Councilmember Schulmeyer.
Okay,
Brian?
Steve has something.
Brian, is the assessment that we did for the community, that information can go stale, correct?
That's correct. You know, that is now, frankly, a little more than a year old, because by the time we finalized that report, it was based on information that had really been done in late 2018. So the report is full of numbers that support, you know, what kind of funding the city will need for local programming. As the pricing for that programming changes and as the industry evolves, the report can become stale, just like any kind of recommendation report that the city council receives. If 2 years pass, you know, you can start to run into questions as to whether the data is still valid. So the sooner we act on using it, if that's our choice, the better.
Councilmember Schulmeyer.
Go ahead, Paul.
So Brian, my question would be, have there been any other communities that I'm sure you represent who have gone through the formal renewal process, and what has the result been?
Yeah, there are other Minnesota communities. They are, at least in the most recent cases, more cable commissions up in the Twin Cities metro area. So these are groups with probably 2 or more larger jurisdictions and then several smaller jurisdictions, and they form a joint powers commission. Ultimately, they tend to result in fairly successful outcomes. What usually happens is, as that formal process unfolds, just like any kind of legal proceeding, the pressure mounts on the parties to sharpen their pencils and get a deal done and settled. Charter has not had as many formal proceedings, and I think that's in part because they tend to serve smaller jurisdictions. In Minnesota, however, they do serve, for example, Rochester, and I did represent Rochester, and a renewal was achieved there. In fact, Winona has often referred to Rochester and said, why don't we just agree to that exact same franchise document? But because of the change in staff and the change in philosophy of the new folks running charter, they've not been willing to proceed that direction.
Councilmember
Councilmember Thurley with a question, Mayor.
Go ahead.
Have you, along with what Councilperson Schulmeyer said, have you had representation for communities like Winona, i.e. with two providers of cable service in this kind of arrangement with one provider accepting, the other one not accepting?
You certainly always have differences between providers, and you know, to that end, each company will have issues that are of greater importance to them, and we've always made it clear to both companies that we want to work with them to make sure that you know, the franchise is flexible to address their specific corporate philosophy. Having said that, council member, state law requires that on certain issues we can't play favorites. Things like franchise fees, PEG support, which is the public educational and governmental support, the area that each operator serves. There are certain things that by law we have to be equal with, or it turns out we're granting a favoritism to one company over another. So directly to your question though, you know, I believe it was, have I faced this before where the operators won't agree to the same document? And the answer is absolutely yes. Definitely faced it before, but usually what we find is we can get franchises that are 90% the same and then 10% different because of those unique corporate issues that you need to address. This one's a little more unique because ironically HBC is the larger of the two operators. HBC by franchise fee payments serves a greater number of customers in the city, agreed to these, which frankly kind of makes the case. They can't be unreasonable conditions that we're seeking if the larger operator was so, you know, quickly willing to agree to them. And that is part of the position I think the city takes is we know we're not being unreasonable because, you know, your competitor has found these provisions to be certainly viable for their business model.
And in the interest of disclosure, I served on the city's charter commission or cable television commission before I became a city council representative. I also was employed by HBC for about 10 years from 2003 to 2013 when I retired. So perhaps I'm maybe a little more familiar with the ins and outs, but you certainly have done a nice job in presenting options to the council, you know, to have our discussion later on. I'm one that was there as well during all of these extensions, and I'm quite frankly ready to go forward with the formal renewal process, but we'll see what the discussion holds when we get to that on our regular agenda. So thank you.
Any other questions for Brian? I guess not. Well, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. If any other questions should arise, please feel free to let me know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Now we're going to move on to our next item is massage therapy, and looking at some of the language that we have in our ordinance. And Debbie, were you going to start this out?
Need to unmute.
Need to unmute. Still can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, now we can.
I thought Steve was going to say a few words. Is that correct?
Oh,
Well, I just wanted to introduce Debbie, and it's Jeannie, right? Okay. They approached me a couple of, well, it's been about a month or so ago, and with this request, I guess it's been longer than that. We've had 14 versions of this ordinance that's before the council. They claim that this issue had been brought up with staff several times in the past. And the attempt is to remove some language from the city code, which is rather detrimental to massage therapy as a profession, and to bring it more into the professional world. We looked at ordinances from the city of Rochester, and I believe Burnsville or Bloomington, ran those past Chris Hood. We came up with a draft, and these two ladies did tremendous work helping to edit and I guess massage the words into an ordinance that works for us. So I guess I'd like to hear from them first for the reasoning and purpose of this, and then field some questions that the council may have.
Okay. I'm sure, Mark, I was a former instructor. I'm a retired instructor in the massage therapy program at Minnesota State College Southeast. And Jeannie is the present instructor there. And I'm sure Mark remembers years ago when I came over to his office when I found this ordinance buried in the files someplace with my yellow magic marker. This isn't right. We got to get rid of this. Anyhow, just there were a lot of old laws on the books at that time, and nothing ever happened. And I was busy. And when both Jeannie and I's practices were shut down due to COVID-19, we both realized that we had time now to work on this and try to get something going. There's only 5 states in the country that do not have massage therapy licenses. Unfortunately, Minnesota is one of them. So a lot of cities have gone to passing their own ordinances to make massage therapy be safe for the public and be part of the healthcare industry. So that's what we attempted to do. And the first 13 pages, I believe, that you might have is the old language that we were under the adult entertainment industry, basically, with a lot of pretty insulting language to our profession. So as Steve said, we worked on an ordinance that we thought was reasonable, and we ourselves really want to have a city licensure, because at the present time, somebody could come and take 2 or 3 classes at Southeast in the massage therapy program, maybe not pass. Certainly we've had students who haven't passed anatomy. They've dropped out of the program, and there's nothing to prevent them from opening an office and saying they're a massage therapist. There's nothing at all to prevent them from doing that. And it's a concern of ours that there's people that can practice out there that don't have adequate education, and it's not safe for the public. So that's our main reason for wanting something passed, is so that the people that are out there practicing have adequate education and have liability insurance as well. Do you have anything to add to that, Jeannie?
I think that would be it, other than I do believe that licensure would also reduce the possibility of the profession being used as a front for illegal activities, which has happened in other cities as well.
Did you want to say something, Debbie?
No, I was.
Oh, okay.
Can you guys hear? Jeannie and I are really close together on our own computers. Can you guys hear the echo, or just us?
I'm having a little hard time hearing.
Okay, I'm going to move to another room then. Yep.
Yeah, when we hear the echo, it's because you're both unmuted. So if just one person mutes when the other person's talking, then it should be fine.
Okay, okay, that's great. Thanks, Eileen. So now we're ready for any questions that anybody might have.
Questions from council?
Councilman Thurley with a question, Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead, Al.
What's the difference between doing this local ordinance versus state licensure, like a beautician or a barber or something like that? How do those things compare?
There is no state license for this. That's the reason that municipalities are adopting it one-on-one, case by case.
Can I say something here? The state of Minnesota has no licensure.
Oh, yes.
Are you muted?
No.
Okay. The state of Minnesota has no licensure at all, which is why we want to implement it in the city. What the state of Minnesota has is a complementary and alternative healthcare bill of rights. So what that means is that in the state of Minnesota, we are to hand this bill of rights to a client when they come in, stating our education, our pricing, a place where they can contact someone if they have a complaint about something, a treatment that they've had. I don't know of many therapists who give this healthcare client bill of rights to their clients when they come in. But that is part of a complementary, there's a healthcare bill at the state of Minnesota that this requires us to do this. But other than that, we have absolutely no licensure. Many massage therapists in the city of Winona have secured a Wisconsin licensure just to hold a credential in the field. Since you wouldn't even have to take a course in massage therapy and you could open a practice and say you're a massage therapist. I think a lot of people are really unaware of that right now.
And that would benefit, obviously, your clients to know that you're fully licensed by some entity. What is the market for this? I mean, I think this sounds like this is something that people are learning more and more about, and that it has greater healthcare value, I would assume.
Yes, and it has become increasingly popular in the healthcare field. For instance, I have several clients who have prescriptions, especially with the opioid epidemic. It is used as an alternative to pain control rather than medicine. So it is definitely growing in that area. It is considered an allied health profession, which is why we need to get, change the classification from adult entertainment to an allied health classification as well.
Yeah, I'm sure you're aware of the history behind the ordinance we originally passed. I wasn't on council at the time. I've been on council for a while, but not when this was passed. But it was, if you look at the newspaper articles of the time, it was quite the event. Let's put it that way. And
yes.
It, just so you know, I've read this through, and it seems to be something that we should move forward on when it does become, on council's agenda for some formal action. So thank you for the presentation. I'm sure other council members might have questions as well. I yield.
Thank you.
Mayor, this is Pam. I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yes. Debbie and Jean, how many massage therapists are there in the city of Winona, do you think? And how many of them have the kind of training that is going to be required of them by this ordinance?
We mostly know of the students who have graduated from our program. A lot of them have stayed in Winona, and I would say there's maybe about 15, but then there's also some therapists that have moved into town that we don't know about their credentials. So there's more, maybe 20, would you say, Jeannie?
Yes, I would say so.
Yeah.
Councilmember Schollmeyer.
Go ahead, Paul.
If we were to enact a licensure in the city of Winona, would that be retroactive to all the current operations within the community? Would they have to go out and get the credentials to gain licensure?
Well, honestly, that is something that I don't know that we addressed in this ordinance, and I know that I've been up to the state legislature many times to try to get a Minnesota bill passed, and what happens is it goes to a committee and it gets stuck there and it never gets acted on. But I know in the state laws, there are some provisions for grandfathering people in. Like, let's say right now our program is 600 hours. A lot of states, that's what their minimum requirement is, 600 hours to get licensure. But let's say somebody went to a program 25 years ago and had 300 hours, but they've had 25 years of experience. There are some provisions for that in state laws. Jeannie, you have a Wisconsin license. Is there a provision for that in your Wisconsin license?
For exactly what, Debbie? What do we?
So is there a provision for somebody to be grandfathered in?
No.
No?
Mr. Mayor, I can probably address this.
Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you.
Mayor and Council, this would not, or this would apply to anybody that wants to operate a massage therapy business or be a massage therapist in the city of Winona, and it would apply following its effective date. If there's concerns about some sort of phase-in related to that, so that people that are doing a massage therapy business or are currently massage therapists that may not have the or meet the qualifications to receive a license under the current ordinance, then that would be something that we would need to look at in terms of either allowing some grace period for those people to receive credentials or making the effective date at some later period of time.
Councilmember Schomeyer.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, this isn't too dissimilar than the profession that I'm in, radon measurement technician, and up until 2019, that profession, this is under Minnesota Department of Health, that profession was not licensed. And then, but leading up to the date that licensure was required, there was basically a schedule, a timeline to allow people to work, to get the training, to get the education credits, and to gain licensure. So it amounted to about a year.
Mayor George here.
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, it's just interesting. So in order for me to get licensed, I would go through the program that you ladies instruct, correct?
Or a program someplace else, as long as
Okay.
you have
Okay.
education.
And what kind of a liability insurance would I need if I was to, let's say, open up a massage parlor, if that's what we want to call it? I know we have a home occupation ordinance that I could maybe probably do this out of my home, but what type of insurance would I need to carry?
Just for clarification, we don't want them to be called massage parlors because that has a pretty negative connotation.
Okay.
So, right now, with the two national professional organizations, you join one of those organizations, you have $1 million of liability insurance with them.
And I would need to have that insurance in order to run my business.
In the city of Winona, that's a part of the ordinance, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Well, Debbie, I do remember the conversation we had those many years ago, and it seemed to me that the approach at that time was to get the state to do this, but it sounds like that's just not gone anywhere. And do it city by city, it sounds like.
It does seem like most cities, like it's problematic for, I have friends in the Twin Cities who are massage therapists, and one of them, she mainly works in Minneapolis, but she does some out call like in Bloomington, so she's got to have a separate licensure there. So, because a lot of those cities have separate licensures up there, so.
Well, it really makes sense, I think. But
Right.
I'm all in favor of it. I think it sounds like something we need to clean up and do, so.
Mayor, I have a comment.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you, Debbie and Jeannie, for taking this on and seeing it through however many revisions you referred to.
I'm listening.
Thank you for doing this work. I am really surprised that all of these ancient terms are still on the books. I didn't know that we had anything like a conversation parlor in town. So would you tell me, Steve or anyone else that knows, are we going to then cross out, we're going to remove all that first material and just leave the material regarding the massage therapist?
Chris, is that something you can
Chris
answer?
could probably explain the process, but yes, we would eventually get rid of all of that.
Okay.
Yes, I can. Mayor and Council, the ordinance itself would basically delete the references to massage as it exists in the city's sexually oriented services ordinance and replace it with a new ordinance for massage therapy in the city of Winona. So that antiquated language would be removed.
How soon do we see this coming back to the council?
Well, as Steve said, we did 14 different revisions. And so Jeannie and I just went through again the last one before this meeting, and both of us feel that all of the concerns that we wanted addressed have been addressed in the ordinance as it is written.
I couldn't hear.
We
We couldn't hear you.
We'd bring it back to the council for a first reading, just as soon as we have it cleaned up.
Okay.
Mayor George here.
Go ahead, George.
Maybe a question for Chris or Steve. Could this business be run out of a person's home?
Yes.
Okay.
There's two provisions. There's the therapist, and then there's the actual, like, a business, a building that holds multiple therapists in it.
But working alone, a person could run this business out of their home.
Correct. I think they may also be subject, maybe Chris could answer, but they may also be subject to the home occupation or home business provisions as well.
Yes, Mayor and Council, where this person was doing the business would be subject to the city's overarching zoning regulations in terms of whether or not that type of activity would be allowed. So as Manager Sarvey stated, the home occupation requirements may apply, and then just general zoning. But, certainly this would license a person to be an individual massage therapist, and that person may do, in-home visits to people to provide massage therapy services.
And Chris, they could also take that if they need to go someplace, like if they're doing, if someone's getting some end-of-life care, they could go take care of that on the road, so to speak.
That's correct, yes.
Any other questions or comments? If not, thank you very much, Debbie and Jeannie, and we'll be talking about this again soon, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
All right, we'll reconvene here at 6:30 for a regular council meeting. 6:30, call the meeting to order. We'll stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
My allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, I have a script I need to read. I've called the meeting to order, and this is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Winona City Council, and it's being held via conference call pursuant to Minnesota Statutes 13D.021 in response to the COVID-19 emergency. Let me please remind those who are on the conference call line, please mute your phones until you're asked to speak. Also, please identify yourself before you speak. As required by the statute, all votes will be conducted by roll call. so each member's vote on each issue can be identified and recorded. Also, if any time a council member is not able to hear the discussion or one another, please interrupt me immediately to indicate so. Also, just a reminder to state your name before you speak so that you're easily identified. I just have an item here I want to mention tonight that thanks to the League of Women Voters, tomorrow night at 5:30, there will be a mayoral forum for the 4 mayoral candidates, and it's from 5:30 to 6:30 via Zoom. And then after a short break from 6:30 to 7, at 7 o'clock, there will be another candidate forum for the 3 people running for the first ward. And then I believe on Wednesday night at 5:30, there's also a similar forum for the county district that has a primary challenge. So tune into that. I think it's a great opportunity to get to know the candidates. And with that, I want to ask the city manager if he has anything. You want me to mention this, right? Okay. Also want to mention that we have a retirement here after, I believe, 30 years or more. Mary Berchter, our finance director, is going to be retiring at the end of the month, and it's hard to state the good work that all the good work that Mary has done for the city over the past several decades. She's been a fantastic finance director, and I think that the city's finances are in great shape, and a lot of that is due to Mary and her team in the finance department. So congratulations, Mary, on your retirement, and thank you for all your really good work over the years for the city of Winona. And now let the city manager, if he has any comments.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one thing. I want to thank Sarah Johnson, who's the Winona Creative Laureate. She's been doing a Winona color project downtown. The front door of Home and Community Options is quite colorful. So thanks, Sarah, for your hard work and for brightening up the downtown. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I will now ask the city clerk to take the roll call. Members of the city council are either present in the council chambers or participating by conference. I guess nobody's in the council chambers but myself and staff, but please indicate your presence by stating here as the city clerk calls your name.
Mayor Peterson.
Here.
Councilman Thurley.
Here.
Moeller.
Here.
Alexander. Iden.
Here.
Warshakowski.
Here.
Schallmeyer.
Here.
And moving on to the public hearings. Item 2.1 is the Bublitz annexation petition.
Okay, I'll declare the public hearing open, and I'd like to state for the public hearing, staff will make a short presentation, and then I'll ask if anyone from the public wishes to speak to the matter. You must clearly state your name and address, and you will be given up to 3 minutes to make your testimony. I'll call 3 times for public comments, and once the hearing is closed, the public may not participate in any discussion by the city council. And remind the council, again, if you want to make a motion, state the following: your name, you move to approve or propose whatever, and to second the motion, state your name and that you're seconding the motion. So we'll, who's here from the staff?
I think Lucy is
No,
online.
Lucy and Carlos.
Oh, they're on Zoom, okay. I'll turn it over to Lucy and Carlos, whoever wants to go first.
Sure. Evening, Mayor and Council. This is Carlos Espinosa, City Planner. I'm going to share my screen here. The request in front of you tonight relates to 9.35 acres of land at 22839 County Road 17, adjacent to the Bridges Golf Course. The location of the land is home to the Cedarbrook Senior Co-op on approximately 3 acres of the proposed annexation. The remaining 6 acres of land is proposed to be a future development area. The item first came in front of council in April of this year, but no action was taken in that time. Since that time, council has approved an orderly annexation agreement that includes the 9.35 acre subject property. But because the agreement isn't in effect yet, we're still working on the legals for the agreement. The petition in front of you tonight is being processed through annexation by ordinance. For this agenda item, council is being asked to decide if the 9.35 acre piece of property should be annexed or not. In terms of costs and benefits for the annexation, the potential costs for this annexation petition are significantly reduced by the presence of utilities in County Road 17 that extend to the Cobblestone Creek subdivision in the bottom portion of your screen. Those are sewer and water utilities that were installed in the 2006-2008 timeframe. When the utilities were designed and constructed in County Road 17, additional development was anticipated along this corridor. As such, both the sewer and water utilities are sized and designed to handle the development proposed with this annexation. Cost for installation of streets and utilities in the development area. First of all, for the senior co-op, will be paid for by the developer. Should the area adjacent to the senior co-op develop in the future for low density residential, the costs for sewer and water and streets and utilities within the development, again, would be paid by the developer at that time. In addition to this, as the area is developed, if the annexation is proposed or is approved, should it be determined that a turning lane is required on County Road 17, a developer would pay for that as well. Of course, the benefits of the annexation include the proposed co-op development, as well as I mentioned, the 6 acres of undeveloped area for the near-term future. That area would remain designated for low-density housing units, so that could be single-family homes or twin homes. Thus, full build-out of the annexed area would include the multifamily housing potentially in the rear of the valley area, existing single-family homes along County Road 17, and then single-family homes or twin homes in between. Council options tonight are first to approve the annexation. Under this motion, under this option, a motion to introduce the ordinance attached to your agenda packets for approval would be in order. If the motion fails, it would constitute a denial. You could also postpone a decision tonight if more information is needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Lucy, did you have anything to add? Guess not. Okay, I'll open it up for anybody else that wishes to speak. If you do, state your name clearly and your address.
Hi there, this is Melissa Nelson with Bradford Development. We are the project sponsor. And I just wanted to let you know that I am participating and on in case anybody has any questions. I also just wanted to assure you that, to the council that we have a team of people working on the development to ensure that we meet all the city ordinances as things progress and as we have future approvals.
Okay, thank you.
Address is 501 North Riverfront Drive, Mankato.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak?
I'd like to say something. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, please state your name and address.
Yep, this is Gabe Erickson at 25475 County Road 17, out in Pleasant Valley. I participated in the previous meeting too, and I mean, obviously you guys have got this planned out well. I just like to speak on behalf of some of the people here who have been doing a lot of work. There's a lot of work going on in this valley as far as restoration and planting prairie and enhancing habitat for pollinators and wildlife. We've got a lot of bluff prairie restorations going on. We're doing roadside work. We're doing work on our lawns, converting lawns. And what I'd really like to see is the city start to really push some of those same efforts on city property and and developments that are being annexed with the city, especially ones that are pushing out into the valleys here. We've got really significantly beautiful areas out here, and we want to make sure that as this continues, we're doing a good job. And in particular, I sent a letter to you guys, all the council members in Carlos. So if the developers would like a copy of that, you're welcome to ask them for that. But I'd like to see some of the developments start to address the terrestrial eutrophication that's happening here. Most of our properties are degrading in quality and diversity over time. We can't just let land lie fallow. Our woods is degrading as we speak. So we need to start maintaining and restoring land. Specifically, what I'd like to see is maybe a firm like Stantec in the Twin Cities be hired to come down and help develop a plan for the natural areas in developments like this. And then I'd like to see that plan be implemented. That might mean some logging, selective logging, taking out a lot of red oaks, leaving white oaks and bur oaks and some hickory, reducing the canopy coverage, restoring the understory. Basically removing a lot of buckthorn and junky trees that are symptoms of eutrophication. None of it's very complicated, but I'd like to see the city start to take some initiative on this. Yeah, and I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody else has them. But you've got my information and that letter. You can certainly.
Thank you, Gabe. Thank you, appreciate it. Anybody else wish to speak? This is the time. Anybody else wish to speak? I'm going to ask one more time. If anybody else wants to speak, now's the time. What? And they want to speak? You know? Okay. We're going to give some instructions for the phone viewers if they want to speak or not.
Just in case if you're using a phone, it is on your phone to hit *6 to unmute yourself, just so you're aware if you want to speak. That's all I got.
Okay. One more opportunity if anybody wishes to speak. Well, hearing none, I'm going to declare the public.
Can you hear me?
Whoop, wait a minute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. This is Leon Bowman, Wilson Town Chair, 2282 7 Garvin Heights Road. As you're all aware, we've got a tentative Orly annexation. We would prefer that we go use that and the language in that for this annexation. As what I'm looking at from what I see so far is you're trying to annex one full parcel and parts of two other parcels. That just doesn't make much sense. We've got this agreement. As far as we're concerned, we're not opposed to an annexation. We would just like to see this go by what we've agreed upon. We're willing to sit down and see what we can do to make this come about. We don't necessarily want to see your project, because it's going to happen one way or the other, get stopped. But we would definitely like to see the early annexation language that we have agreed upon, that we worked hard to accomplish, go by that. Now, I would suggest that you could postpone this while you could give staff or whatever to see what we can come up with to make this come about with what we have agreed upon. And I understand we got the legal stuff, that's all job, our parcel descriptions and all that. But I would think that we could do something without all of that being in place. I'm just throwing that out there because I think that would be a good gesture, and it would keep us all on a happy note, especially after all the work that we've done on trying to get this early annexation agreement to go. So basically, that's what my comments are. That's our board's feeling. So if you have any questions, I'm willing to, I'll listen in. Thank you.
Thank you, Leon. I'll ask again if anybody wishes to speak. Okay. Hearing none, I am going to declare the public hearing closed and open it up for the council to consider.
Mayor George here.
Go ahead, George.
Could the city attorney or Manager Sarvey, what direction, if we motion to introduce the attached ordinance, and how is this going to play in with the agreement that's apparently on the table but not signed? How would any of this change?
Mayor and Council, I would submit it's going to be several months before we're ready to set the orderly annexation forward to the state for approval. I think what the Township Board Chair is asking is we follow as much of the process in the orderly annexation agreement as possible. I guess the question to Carlos would be, how much land is there on the entire Bublitz property if we were going to annex the entire piece instead of just these 9? And then for the attorney, if we were going to do that, we would still need to do it by ordinance because the annexation agreement is not in force at this time.
Mayor and
It would be-
council. Oops,
Go ahead,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Chris. Chris, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor and council. So given the time frame associated with completing the orderly annexation agreement, it would obviously the legal descriptions need to be that work needs to be done and included in the agreement. The agreement needs to be filed with the state of Minnesota, and the state of Minnesota needs to approve it. That is going to take some time. I don't know what the developers' plans are in terms of their timing, but obviously there would be a significant delay there. In terms of the impact of the annexation ordinance that's before you versus if this was an annexation resolution that was submitted pursuant to the orderly annexation agreement, there's very little difference in the effect of this in terms of the notifications that occur related to the annexation. Actually, there's more process here than would be under the orderly annexation agreement because this one actually constitutes a public hearing before the council can proceed with it. The orderly annexation agreement doesn't call for a public hearing for subsequent annexations that occur under the orderly annexation agreement. So I just from a legal standpoint, I don't see a lot of difference between what the effect is of acting on an ordinance now versus under the orderly annexation agreement, except that we would be acting under an orderly annexation agreement. But effectively, in terms of what's required to occur there, they act very similarly. So I guess that's my comment from a legal perspective.
Okay, thank you. Carlos, did you still want to say something?
Yes, Mayor, if we were looking at all 3 of the parcels that are owned by Mr. Bublitz in that area, it'd be approximately 150 acres.
Okay, thank you.
And so then I guess the point is for a annexation by ordinance, the city can only do 120 acres per year, correct, Chris?
Mayor and council, that is correct. There is a provision under section 414.033 that allows for annexations of 120 acres or less.
Okay.
Other
Mayor,
questions?
George here.
Go ahead.
George here, Mayor.
Go ahead.
So if this would get annexed tonight, if I'm hearing correctly, the orderly annexation agreement, what's spelled out in there would be enforced, if that's the right word to use, enforced on this project right here, or on this annexation right here.
The orderly annexation agreement, once it becomes effective, which means it's approved by the state, which will be months from now, that would not affect this particular annexation. This particular annexation will have been concluded under the council's action if the council approves the ordinance. And the ordinance needs to be filed with the state, and the state actually needs to approve the ordinance. So there's some process there, but this annexation would occur under the ordinance process, not under the orderly annexation agreement.
And the senior co-op housing project would be delayed by a number of months then, correct? If we waited, yeah. Okay, other comments?
Yes, Mayor, this is Pam. I do have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Pam.
Yes, I would like to know I didn't understand really what is the difference between the town board. Leon said that this ordinance annexes one parcel and parts of two other parcels, and that was somehow objectionable to him and to the town board. I don't understand why that would be, and is there some way we can adjust that so that it makes the whole thing more smooth as far as they're concerned? Do we have to annex the whole, what did you say, how many acres? The Bublitz property is quite large. We don't want to annex all that by ordinance. So what's the difference?
Carlos, can you answer that question?
Yes, the request in front of you tonight was made by the landowner, the petitioner, Mitch Bublitz, and the same thing would be true under the orderly annexation agreement. We would rely on a landowner to petition for a certain piece of land that they'd like to be annexed within the overall orderly annexation agreement area. It could be a whole parcel, it could be part of a parcel. In this case, he is requesting that 9.35 acres. And what he has done is done the necessary survey work, to my knowledge, in coordination with Bradford Development to create a 9.35 acre annexation area that would split off from the larger total 150 acres that he owns.
Okay, so thank you. So it would be in the hands of the property owner to make the request to have these one parcel and parts of two other parcels annexed either way.
Correct.
Right, now or later. Okay, thank you.
Mayor, George here.
Go ahead, George.
I would motion to introduce the attached ordinance for approval.
Mayor, this is Pam. I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Councilmember Schulmeyer.
Go ahead, Paul.
There are two questions I have, and just before the motion was made, I wanted to address or ask Township Chair Bowman a question that answers or responds to why the township has some concerns or doesn't want these pieces annexed rather than something else. What is their reasoning? And then I have a different question once that's answered.
Okay, can we allow Leon back on to answer that question?
I think so. If Leon's still on.
Is Leon, or is he there?
I'm here.
Okay,
I'm here.
Did you hear the question from Councilman Schulmeyer?
I heard the question into why we wanted to go with the whole parcels instead of partials. The reason, basically our reason is you've got a parcel. It's easier to annex a whole parcel than it is a chunk. And what happens when you start doing the little chunks like that, it's all the prime real estate, and then the rest of it just sits there and nothing happens with it. If you were to do the parcel, and it's about 130 acres, but you've got woodland back there because people have been worried about runoff and such and so forth. They're worried about park area. It'd give you a nice expansive area. And we just don't feel that you take a little chunk here and a little chunk there. Pretty soon we got pieces and parts all over along 17. We just as soon see a whole parcel go at once instead of just little chunks here and there. That was our feeling. That was the way we looked at it. Then we don't have to go through another process. Oh well, I decided I want to take another chunk out of this. It's a one-time deal and it's a done. That was our feelings on it. And I hope that answers your question.
Please.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for answering that question and coming back on. I have a different comment, and I just want to address Mr. Erickson's comments. I agree with him entirely. When we look at these developments, we're having serious issues. When I was on soil and water, soil erosion is a big concern in the county. We're moving up into the valleys and coulees that surround Winona. We're no longer situated on the island along the river. We have to seriously take into account the issues that these steep hillsides, how they're forested, and the impact of developing them, what that has on the existing developments below. And I would encourage council to develop ordinances that follow the direction that Mr. Erickson outlined. That's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anybody else wish to comment?
Mayor, Eileen here.
Go ahead, Eileen.
Yeah, just, I agree with Paul. I really appreciated what Mr. Erickson had to say, and that's what he mentioned specifically, the stewardship and proper care of the land is a big part of the reason that I'm supportive of the annexation. I think that the pieces of the city currently that have wildlife that we want to encourage back in or remove. Same with flora, that we've done a pretty good job of taking care of the bluffland, and so I look forward to the city working to take those suggestions under advisement. And I do think, since we do have sewer and water already out there, that it makes a lot of sense, especially since this development is now upcoming, for us to bring this into the city.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, this is Pam. I have a relevant
Go ahead,
question
Pam.
here. Yes. At what point, this question is for city staff. At what point would these suggestions regarding the environment out there be taken into consideration? How do we do that? What's the next step? This is an annexation. So at what point do we come back and take a look at these suggestions again?
Mayor,
Sure.
Council, that would be during the site plan review. And since the developer has been listening to all of this conversation, I'm sure they'll have some thoughts for themselves to put in before we need to make comment.
Thank you.
Al here with a comment, Mayor.
Go ahead, Al.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been supportive of this project from the beginning, but as far as the environmental issues that were raised tonight, later on in our meeting, we're going to be looking at a wonderful document that the city put together with the help of a consultant for the Bluffland Traverse project. We have not, related exactly in this area, but in similar circumstances. And I think that's a good planning document, or at least an outline for perhaps what eventually will happen as the city goes forward, in the valleys and the hillsides that we are moving into. So again, I support the motion. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments?
Councilmember Schulmeyer.
Go ahead, Paul.
One final note. One of the concerns related to these natural area surveys, the lands that we we might be looking at to annex don't currently belong in the public entity of the city of Winona. And so I doubt rather that the city would be paying to do surveys on of land that might or might not be annexed in the future. That would be, something that maybe we would have to look at in some type of collaborative effort with the township, or perhaps the Soil and Water Board could help develop something like that. But I mean, there are some concerns about horse and cart, and I would rather not have the cart coming again ahead of the horse, as in this particular situation, as we continue to develop southward down County Road 17 and up on the hill. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak? Not, I think we're ready to vote. We have a motion. All right. We'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Peterson,
Aye.
Councilman Thurley,
Aye.
Councilwoman Moeller,
Aye.
Alexander, Iden,
Aye.
Worzikowski,
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Moving on to the petitions, requests, and communications. Item 3.1 is the appointment to the Housing and Redevelopment Authority of Robert Palmer.
George, Mayor moves to approve the appointment.
Eileen, I second.
Okay, a motion by George and seconded by Eileen. Any comments?
Mayor George here.
Go ahead, George.
This Robert Palmer now, he is replacing a longtime board member, Robert Hiverly Johnson. I had the opportunity to work with Robert for 11 years, and he did a phenomenal job on that Housing and Redevelopment Board. So I want to thank him for his time to the HRA and to the city of Winona.
Okay. Anybody else? We'll vote. All those, we're going to vote by roll call.
Mayor Peterson,
Aye.
Councilman Thurley,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Alexander, Iden,
Aye.
Worzikowski,
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Carries.
Item 3.2, appointments to the Human Rights Commission of Rachel Heim and Takanda Epps.
Make a
Councilmember
motion
Schollmeyer
to-
move to approve.
I'll second.
Okay. Motion by Paul, seconded by Eileen. Any comments? Hearing none, we'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Peterson,
Aye.
Councilman Thurley,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Alexander, Iden,
Aye.
Worzikowski,
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Carries.
Item 3.3 is the craft beer tour agreement with Layton Enterprises, scheduled for Saturday, September 12th. And I believe we have representatives from Layton Enterprises on the phone if you have questions.
George here, Mayor. I would motion to approve the license agreement and to authorize administration to execute the order.
Councilmember Schollmeyer move second.
Okay, we have a motion by George and a second by Paul. Are there questions for Layton Broadcasting?
Councilmember Schollmeyer.
Go ahead, Paul.
So naturally, our concerns are related to the current pandemic that we're under. This event is happening on September 12th. Our current mask ordinance ends on the 7th or 6th or something like that. I know we'll be revisiting that perhaps in September. I just am curious. I know there are some notes in the agreement. Just wondering if the pandemic seems to go downhill, what the organizers have in store or planned, or what would they be doing? Canceling the event, etc.
This is Jim Allgaier, General Manager of Clayton Broadcasting here in Winona. We come up with a preparedness plan that we have sent to you. That's if nothing changes. If things change, that'll change. We're doing 4 of these as of right now, 1 in August. So we'll be the second one, and then there's 2 other ones in September after ours. So we won't be the guinea pig. We'll be able to see how the August one goes. This event is usually about 1,000 people. We're limiting it to the 250, which is 200 attendees, 35 vendors, and 15 volunteers. And instead of doing 1 event for 4 hours, we're going to do 2 events for 3 hours each. So we're going to have the whole area as we've always had for 1,000 people or more. And we're going to limit it to 250 and spread everything out. In the notes for the preparedness plan, you'll see the things we put in there to do the best we can to separate everything. And we think 250 people, the separation will be fine. Most people come with a couple people, you and your spouse or significant other, and it'll definitely be spread out. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, could you explain to me how you're going to control social distancing with a crowd of 250 people? Are you going to have security there? Who's going to be telling these people to keep their distance?
There's going to be security. There's going to be the 15 volunteers are mostly the people that are going to be doing that. There's going to be marks in the vicinity where their lines are. All the lines will be marked, so it'll be 6 feet when you're in the line to get a beverage or to get in. It's going to be do the same things that Quick Trip does right now, putting things in their store out. So we're going to do the same thing. Everything's going to be marked out by 6 feet.
I don't know. I just have to say that this seems like an event that probably shouldn't be held this time. It just doesn't seem. I wish it wasn't being held, and I'm having some problems supporting this. And it just seems like 250 people at a time confined in an area in Levy Park, in the east end of Levy Park, drinking just isn't really a good idea. And,
I think if this was today, I think you might be right. I think this is a couple months away, and we have to get approval for it and work with the city as we move forward. And if it's not the right thing to do in the future, we won't. It's just like when we canceled it prior.
Okay.
Councilmember Schomeyer.
Go ahead, Paul.
So then, I guess then I'm looking for a definitive answer, I guess. If we have a mask mandate in the community, because your notes in your plan say we'll ask vendors and attendees to wear masks. So I'm asking, if we have a mask mandate in the city, will you require vendors and attendees to wear masks?
Absolutely.
But the participants wouldn't have to, just the vendors would. Is that right?
It would depend what the ordinance, what the law would say by then. I mean, it's an outside event. It would just depend. And it might be in the best interest of, as we put it in our preparedness plan now, the vendors and volunteers will be wearing masks and gloves.
Any other comments from council?
I think we'll have a good feel after we do the one August 15th in Detroit Lakes of what we can and can't do and where we're at that point.
Mayor George here.
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, like, with the event coming up, I understand what the gentleman's all talking about. And if for some odd reason things happen to worsen or whatever the scenario may be, your option is there to cancel it, but you have to have gotta have it prepared and all the dates set and approval before that comes. So I understand that. And I know if it is bad come that time, it certainly would be canceled. I understand that.
Absolutely.
Any other comments?
This is Pam. I'd like to
Pam,
just
go ahead.
ask for clarification. If it worsens or if it gets worse, okay, what's the cutoff point? How do we know at what point should you stop holding the event?
I think it will depend. I don't really know the answer. I think it might depend on what the laws are then for that time. And if we can abide by those, great. If we can't, then we won't have it.
The Big Muddy is canceled, isn't it? It's right.
Yes.
Right before that.
Yes.
Part of it is yes, but the majority of it is.
Well, I think Habitat for Humanity is a wonderful organization. I understand the need for fundraising. I think Leighton Broadcasting is a great business in our community, but I'm just not comfortable with this, and I'm not going to support the motion. Any other comments from council, or are we ready to vote?
Can I ask a question of the attorney?
Go ahead.
Chris Hood, is there a way that the city could also force this contract to end if the pandemic is raging at that time? Under emergency powers or something?
Yeah, I mean, we could probably revoke the license under the determination that it's not in the interest of public safety to allow the event to occur.
And we would certainly want to work with the folks to make sure that that's a mutual decision. But at the end of the day, if the pandemic is really taking off, we could consult with our fire chief and make that decision.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, the long and the short of it is that the license allows the use of a public space, and we control the use of the public space. So in the interest of public safety, if there's a determination that this is not in the interest of public safety, then we can revoke the license.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Schomeyer.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I just want to echo, I mean, totally support Habitat for Humanity. I'm almost always a participant in their fundraisers. And of course, I've been an attendee at the Craft Brew Festival, and I seconded the motion because I guess I want to see if it's possible to make this work. We're all kind of playing our own role in this grand experiment, this pandemic, and this is but a little piece of it. And so I am somewhat curious how it will go. I'm going to be supporting this, and I want Habitat and Leighton to know that I'm really hoping that this can work out for them. But I am also prefacing my comments saying that I really believe that if we're in a serious situation, that we should indeed cancel.
This is Jim Allgaier speaking again, and I would totally agree with you. This is something that we are putting out there now so we can make the plans for it. And if it ends up not happening, we understand that. This isn't about doing this no matter what. This is about doing it. And it might be the first event that we can actually have around town. And if it's not, then it'll be the next one in September or the October, or what, somebody else will be having the first event. But sooner or later, there's going to be one. So we're just setting the table for ourselves to have this as scheduled. And if it ends up not happening, we're all on board working with the city. And as Chris said, you can revoke it anyway. So at least we can start working the process to get it done if it can happen.
Mayor, Councilmember Muller.
Go ahead, Eileen.
Yeah, I, as someone whose job is to organize events and have a lot of people in the same room at the same time, and everything got canceled, and So the idea of an event where people could safely gather is very exciting. And, you know, like everyone said, I'm very supportive of Habitat, and I think Layton is a great company to have in town. I will support this, knowing that the city, you know, controls the public space, and that if there's another uptick in cases, I believe that when everything first shut down, that we had reservations to use, for example, the Masonic and the other parks, and that those reservations were canceled. Am I understanding that this would be a similar situation, where in the interest of public health, it's just like no things at all?
Correct.
Chris, okay, great. Okay, then I'm comfortable supporting it. Although it gives me such anxiety thinking about it. My stomach hurts right now, but fingers crossed.
Anybody else? If not, we'll vote.
Mayor Peterson,
Nay.
Councilman Thurley,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Alexander, Iden,
Nay.
Borzakowski,
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Item 3.4 is a request for a temporary wine and beer license for Habitat for Humanity for the craft beer tour on Saturday, September 12th.
Make a motion to approve the license.
Councilmember Schoenmeyer, second.
Okay, motion by Eileen, seconded by Paul. Any discussion? Since the previous motion passed, I'll support this one, I guess. So. We'll vote. All those in favor, we'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Peterson,
And against. Aye.
Councilman Thurley,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Alexander, Iden,
Aye.
Borzakowski,
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
And that carried, so we will
Carried, yeah.
move on to item 3.5, the Wabasha street closure request for a meet and greet on Wednesday, July 29th.
George moves to approve the street closure.
Councilmember Schoenmeyer, second.
Moved by George, seconded by Paul. Any discussion? Hearing none.
Councilmember Moeller, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Eileen.
So this meet and greet is coming up pretty soon, but I didn't see any information about any provisions for social distancing or anything like that. Do we know how many people are anticipated to be at this, or is it treated like a private gathering? I just curious since it would be technically on a street. Just curious if anyone has any more information about safety precautions.
I don't have any of that information.
I believe it is a meet and greet for a mayor candidate. Since it is on a street, we will ask them to follow our physical distancing rules and masks. And if they don't, since it's on a street, I think we would have the ability to ask them to close it down. So I'm sure they will comply.
Any other comments? All right, we'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Peterson,
Aye.
Thurley,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Iden,
Aye.
Borzakowski,
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Item 3.6 is a wedding request for Levy Park for August 1st.
George moves to approve the request.
Eileen, second.
Motion by George and seconded by Eileen. Questions or comments? My understanding is this is a fairly small wedding group. Okay. Sorry, Al, did you want to say something?
Just the same requirements as we've been discussing for other events really should apply here. And even though it's a small one, as you say, Mayor, we certainly could always use following the necessary guidelines to make sure everybody's safe. It would be sad if that was, a transmission point at a joyous event like that. So just my comments.
Okay. Any other comments? Yeah, we'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Peterson,
Aye.
Thurley,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Iden,
Aye.
Borzakowski,
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Carries.
Moving on to item 5.1 under new business is to extend the cable television franchise agreement with Charter Communications until December 31st of 2020.
Mayor Al here.
Go ahead, Al.
I would move to grant this or to adopt the attached resolution granting the extension for our discussion earlier this evening.
George will second that, Mayor.
Okay, motion by Al and seconded by George. Any further discussion?
Councilmember Schollmeyer.
Go ahead, Paul.
So my question would be, at what point, based on the suggestion from Brian, at what point do we actually say, all right, we're going to, rather than an informal agreement, to a formal agreement and start that procedure? When do we get to that point?
Mayor and council, I believe our plan would be to come back to council with our proposal on how to proceed with the formal as well as informal plan. It might be as soon as the next council meeting.
That is
But
correct.
you would need to take a formal vote to approve that formal process. Legal amounts.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? All right, we'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Peterson,
Aye.
Councilman Thurley,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Iden,
Aye.
Borzakowski,
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Carried.
Item 5.2 is the Renewable Energy Procurement Collaborative.
Councilmember Schollmeyer moved to a motion to support the participation.
Councilmember
Mayor.
Mueller, I second.
Okay, motion by Paul and seconded by Eileen. Comments? Questions?
Councilmember Schollmeyer.
Go ahead, Paul.
I'm not sure if Mr. Howard is in the house.
Yes.
To maybe explain this a little bit more. I think I got the gist of it. This is looks like the city of Minneapolis is looking for a number of collaborators to perhaps make the buy down of these renewable opportunities less costly for participating cities. Is that kind of the general idea?
Mayor and Council.
Okay, go ahead, John.
Mayor and Council, yes, Councilmember Stonewall, you are correct. It is an effort led by the City of Minneapolis with the goal of reducing the cost for themselves and for other cities that want to participate in procuring renewable energy credits and renewable energy.
So if just to follow up, so then we're not obligated to purchase any solar at this point or whatever renewable. We're just showing support and interest that gives the city of Minneapolis more leverage when they go to Excel.
Correct. The city of Minneapolis is looking for other city partners to show that there is support beyond themselves, as well as to get an estimation of the total capacity that might be available or might be needing renewable energy credits. The city currently has about 3.5 million kilowatt hours of electricity that is not under a community solar garden agreement. So that what's in the community solar agreements is pretty much locked up for use. So it would, well, as we get into discussions, they'll want to know what we might possibly put forward how much capacity we might be interested in having. But at this point, there is no obligation to purchase anything. This is simply an exploratory stage, but they are hoping to get a sense of scale as to what might be what the city might be interested in, and to just essentially put together a bigger proposal than what they could do themselves.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? We'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Peterson.
Aye.
Councilman Thurley.
Aye.
Moeller.
Aye.
Iden.
Aye.
Worzakowski.
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Item 5.3 is the Aquatic Invasive Species Prevention Grant Acceptance.
Councilmember Schollmeyer moved to authorize the city and manager to execute the grant agreement.
Eileen Moore,
seconds
second.
Motion by Paul, and I think a second by George. Discussion?
Councilmember Schollmeyer.
Go ahead, Paul.
I just want to thank the County Soil Water Conservation District and I'm guessing maybe Mr. Howard for working on bringing this conservation work to the city. We don't often get opportunities to participate in soil water conservation work through the county, and this is a great opportunity, and really glad to see it happening. And I hope that our anglers and boaters on Lake Winona participate so we get good survey results.
Okay.
Councilmember Moeller.
Go ahead, Eileen.
Yeah, I just had similar comments as Paul, but wanted to thank John for his work on this. I think we consistently see really clear information from him, and just that this grant was really, really excellent, and I learned quite a lot reading through it. So I'm looking forward to seeing what positive impact this has on the community.
Councilmember Thurley with a question.
Go ahead, Al.
On page 5 of Exhibit A, where it talks about observed angler boater behavior at the pilot public water access sites, about a little below halfway on the page, it says that there's a visit to each pilot site once during a weekend and once during a weekday for at least 2 hours. Who's going to be involved actually doing that?
Mayor, Council, and Councilman Thurley, the hope is that we could get some volunteers who would basically go there and have a tally sheet to see if it's anglers, if it's boaters, and if they are currently cleaning their boat or what they're doing with their bait. That would be the ideal situation. I myself would otherwise be the individual that's doing the observation. So that there is potential for some staff time in doing so. But we do feel that as part of the grant being a pilot project, they do feel it's important that we have baseline data so that we know essentially what people are doing now, and also if there's any change based on having new materials present.
Signs
So
and everything like that, yeah. Yep. Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
Mayor, George here, just a question or whatever. Any update as to how are we coming with the carp removal out of Lake Winona? Jan or Steve, whoever can answer that.
I can address that, Mayor and Council. We are looking at options for the carp removal, and and George, thank you for providing some contacts and opportunities for removal companies. I think we will probably, if we do removal, it will be next year. There might be some work done this year, but we want to see if there's any need for kind of doing a formal carp survey. which would likely be done by Winona State students, or that would be the optimal solution, is to use their biological students as part of their lab work to do a carp survey to get an idea of how many carp, what the egg structure is, and also to determine where they might be breeding. So we'd like to have that information before we do a removal effort. But if we do removal, it would likely be next year, hopefully with some data, so we can know how many carp we think are out there, and then how many we're actually bringing in when we do the removal.
Thank you, John.
Any other questions? We'll move to vote by roll call.
Mayor Peterson.
Aye.
Councilman Thurley.
Aye.
Moeller.
Aye.
Iden.
Aye.
Borzakowski.
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Item 5.4 is to request approval of the agreement for an encroachment into the flood control easement by Bay State Milling.
Mayor George moves to approve the review.
Eileen seconds.
Okay, motion by George, seconded by Eileen. Any comments or questions?
Councilmember Schollmeyer.
Go ahead, Paul.
I see that Keith is online. I'm just wondering, this isn't going to impact any of the future plans for the river trail, the bike trail, pedestrian trail?
Mayor and council, and two things is this still will be subject to a.
Could you speak closer to the microphone, Keith?
All right. Two things. This is still subject to a core review. So if there are any problems with the core, it would have to come out. But no, the bike trail is proposed on the other side of the concrete levee. So this would not anywhere close to that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, we'll proceed to vote by roll call.
Mayor Peterson.
Aye.
Councilman Thurley.
Aye.
Moeller.
Aye.
Alexander. Iden.
Aye.
Borzakowski.
Aye.
And Schollmeyer.
Motion carries.
Item 5.5, approval of the amendments to the Winona Airport FBO leases.
Mayor George moves approval of the amendments.
Councilmember Schollmeyer, second.
Okay, motion by George, seconded by Paul. Any comments or questions?
Councilmember Schollmeyer.
Go ahead, Paul.
Just want to say it's good to see Dr. Boland's face present here at our meeting.
Say that again. I guess I didn't hear it.
I just wanted to say it's good to see Dr. Boland's face present here at our meeting.
Oh, okay, thank you.
I wondered though if that's his mask on top of his head.
Everybody's got to have some issue. All I can say.
There he is.
There he is.
All right. Any comments or questions from anybody? If not, we'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Peterson.
Aye.
Councilman Thurley.
Aye.
Moeller.
Aye.
Iden.
Aye.
Borzakowski.
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Carries.
Mayor Peterson and council. May I
Go
have a
ahead,
moment?
George.
I just want to thank all of you for all of the support that you've given to the airport, and especially the staff, except for one individual, and I think he's retiring here shortly, so I can take a shot at him. But Keith has just been outstanding, and so has everybody. We've always considered this to be a core situation where we were part of the core, the city, the state, and the federal government. And I think it reflects in the safety and our ability to greet the people as they come to Winona by air and service their equipment. And thank you very much, because this is important to us and to our staff because of the capital improvements we have to make in people, number one, and equipment, number two, down the line. So thank you all. Appreciate it. We look to work hard with you continuously.
Well, thank you too for all the hard work you and your staff do out at the airport. All right, moving along.
Item 5.6 is a plat review for Bay State Milling Company.
Mayor George moves to approve the attached resolution.
Eileen seconds.
Okay, motion by George, seconded by Eileen. Discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Peterson,
Aye.
Councilman Thurley,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Iden. Aye. Worzikowski,
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Item 5.7 is the plat review for the Port Authority First Subdivision.
Here, Councilman Thurley, here I move to approve the attached resolution.
George seconds that.
Okay, moved by Al and seconded by George. Discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Peterson,
Aye.
Councilman Thurley,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Iden. Aye. Worzikowski,
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Carries.
Item 5.8 is the Police School Liaison Officer Agreement Termination.
Councilmember Schollmeyer moved to approve the agreement.
Eileen seconds.
Motion by Paul, seconded by Eileen. Discussion? Hearing none, vote by roll call.
Mayor Peterson,
Aye.
Councilman Thurley,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Iden. Aye. Worzikowski,
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Item 5.9 is the affirmation of the mayor's proclamation requiring face coverings in indoor areas accessible to the public, issued July 7th.
Councilmember Schollmeyer moved to approve.
Councilwoman Iden seconds.
Okay, we have a motion by Paul and a second by Pam. I brought this up briefly under my comments 2 weeks ago. There really wasn't enough time. The order was drawn up, and the council really didn't have enough time to discuss it. I moved forward with it on my own, and tonight I'm asking for the support of the council to back that order. I think the biggest responsibility the council, mayor and council have are the safety of our citizens. And I know there's been a lot of pushback on this from people that don't believe in the COVID virus. They don't believe in masks. They think masks are dangerous. Their constitutional rights are being violated. But I think the vast majority of people in this community appreciate the fact that we're requiring masks. And that decision was not made easily. It was based on the advice from the CDC, the Surgeon General, the Minnesota Department of Health, leading scientists, Winona Health, our own COVID response team, and I want to thank the people of Winona for participating in this. I think that we've had very good participation. Places I've been, people are wearing masks, and I think most people appreciate that and feel better about it. And that's all I really want to say about it tonight. But if we have questions, specific questions, our emergency manager, Kurt Biddle, is here, our fire chief, and he could speak to some of the implementation if you have questions. So open it up for discussion.
Councilman Thurley with a question for our fire chief.
Okay.
Are you still handing out masks at the central fire station?
Councilman, yes, we are. We currently have a stockpile of masks on our mailbox, and we replenish that nightly. And I believe we're covering language of its location via Facebook and social media.
Any other comments?
Yes, Mayor, this is Pam.
Go ahead, Pam.
Yes, I want to thank you for going ahead with the requirement of masks last week. I had many people enthusiastically responding to that. saying that they feel much safer going into stores, going into places, now that they're reasonably assured that people will be masked there. So it has made a big difference, I think, in our confidence as a community. And I hope it continues. And thank you.
Thank you. One thing I omitted in part of the reasoning behind going forward and doing it at the time I did it is because of the cities of Mankato and Rochester were both doing it at that time. We thought there would be an advantage in a regional approach, and also because of what we saw going on down in, especially in La Crosse and on Alaska, and the numbers there increasing significantly as well as here in Winona.
Mayor George here.
Go ahead, George.
I said you had the authority to do that, as I mentioned at the last meeting, and that's certainly fine. But as far as, and I'm hearing from people that pretty much understand why we're doing it, and pretty much what I'm hearing out of this whole deal, in which I believe in the Winona people know where and when to wear a mask. Before this order went into effect, they were wearing it. Many of our retail stores already had requirements for people to come in with face masks. Our bars and restaurants have it. I feel the Winona people don't have to be legislated as to where and when to wear a mask. They know that. We're smart people.
Well, I mean, I'll agree that City of Winona people are very smart people, but I think that the efforts that we put into trying to get people to wear masks and on their own voluntarily, that wasn't working all that well. At least some of the places I went into, you'd see half of the people, 60% of the people maybe wearing masks. Now they're all wearing them, which I think is much improved. And I don't know if you've got a better plan other than requiring people to wear masks, but I don't.
How would this be enforced?
Well, it's enforced by the businesses themselves. If somebody comes in without a mask, they're asked to wear a mask, and if they refuse to wear a mask, they should be asked to leave. If they refuse to leave, the police could be called, and they could be ticketed for trespassing.
Do we have a fine on this for this?
The trespassing fine, I believe, is about $100.
Okay. So anyway, people know what to do.
Mayor,
Many do. Eileen,
sorry,
go
George.
ahead.
I just wanted to echo what Pam said. I got many emails from people thanking the city for doing this. And I think, and I did get a few from people who were very upset about it. And I think that that's a pretty natural reaction. This is, I think we're all kind of sick of hearing the phrase, these times we're in, or these unprecedented times, but that's what it is. And that has caused a lot of fear and uncertainty, which often causes people to act irrationally or even against what is best for them or healthiest for them and their families and their communities. And I think that asking citizens to do this in order to keep others safe is a good safeguard against that sort of some of those fear reactions where people get upset about looking out for their fellow citizens. I know I personally, I believe I'm the only person on council who's of the millennial generation, but I could be wrong.
Which generation?
I thought you'd appreciate that, George. And I know a lot of times my generation is chided for being selfish and for not thinking ahead. And I think that the great majority of people that I've seen really enthusiastic about this and glad to do a very small thing, be perhaps just a teeny bit uncomfortable for a very short period of time in order to potentially protect a lot of people, because you may not know if you're sick. I think that's the thing that has made me very fearful is I could have gone somewhere and picked it up and I may not have any symptoms, but then I go someplace else and I could get someone sick who's much more susceptible than me. And so I think this is a very small thing we can do. Part of living in a community means that you sometimes are uncomfortable for just a small period of time in order to serve the greater good. And so I really appreciate all of the Winonans who are putting their community ahead of their minor discomfort for a very short period of time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Schoenmeyer.
Go ahead, Paul.
I just want to say thanks again too, and I will just say that I have noticed an increase in mask wearing since the ordinance became effective, and I'm grateful for that, and I want to thank the community members out there who are participating and supporting this and supporting their fellow community members. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other comments? Steve?
Mayor, I do have a comment. One of the exceptions is for individuals under the age of 2 for being exempted from wearing the mask, and I wonder if that number should be changed. We've seen numbers of as high as 10-year-olds and 5-year-olds. I'm wondering if 8-year-old might be a better age.
Correct. Mayor and Council, I've reviewed approximately 12 different amendments throughout 12 different cities, and they range in age from 2 to 12. We had earlier discussions pertaining to daycare facilitators and through around ages of 5 to 10. So I think the intent, if we do change this, would just to make this amendment more usable and friendly to Winonans and make it more realistic. I think we all realize it's going to be impossible to keep a mask on a 2-year-old. So if we could come to, if we're looking at changing it, if an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old would probably be more sufficient. I know there's been studies out of South Korea with infection rates, nothing approved by CDC, but I think we'd be safe in the 8 to 10-year-old range if we did change it.
It seems like a reasonable edit to me to change that age. But I don't know if somebody wants to make a motion to amend.
I'll make a motion to amend it to age 10
I
or
would
8.
second that.
8? Or what was it?
I'm asking, what is there? Is there recommendation?
You're suggesting 8? 8 or 10?
8 or 10 would work.
I'm going to pick 10.
All right.
I'd second that. Mrs.
Okay,
Camp.
we have a motion and a second to amend it to 10. Any discussion on the amendment?
Councilmember Schoenmeyer.
Go ahead,
Go ahead,
Paul.
Paul.
I just, thinking back to my college psychology classroom and childhood brain development, I think this is actually a practical and sensible thing to do, because it's not until we get to a young adolescent where they understand the impact of their decision making. And so this is, I think, a good decision.
Okay. Any other comments on the amendment?
Councilman Thurley here.
Go ahead, Al.
I would rather us not adopt this for the very simple reason I'd rather have it based on a study and guidelines from those experts in the field, rather than trying to kind of parse out some rationale behind it. In fact, I've seen stories talking about asymptomatic 10-year-olds. But again, those are the things that are out there. I'm not an expert, and I don't think this amendment will be healthy. I'd rather wait until there's some definitive study on possible asymptomatic children at that age, unfortunately, and then we can perhaps modify it going forward to reflect accurate scientific guidelines in those areas.
Okay. Any other comments? Steve?
The only comment I'd like to make, Mayor and Council, is the fact that many of the concerns we've gotten have been around the age issue, and that 2 years old is just too low of a number. So while I'd like to be able to have science on our side, there was a study that came out that talked about kids younger than 10 not really being able to spread the virus as well as 10 to 19 being the same as adults. That was just issued, I think, over the weekend.
And that was through South Korea.
Correct.
I believe they did the study. You know, this is something we're kind of tackling as we go along, and I think it's been the city's goal to look not only nationally but internationally for best practice, just because we don't really truly have a paved road per se on how to proceed with this. So the 8 to 10 was just brought up just based on that South Korean study that was done.
And those younger children really have difficulty, and it just adds stress to the overall situation. So.
Okay.
Councilman Thurley here.
Go ahead, Al.
Appreciate the input. Again, I think it should be based on science, but I appreciate the discussion. And given that, I will now vote to support the amendment.
Okay, I think we're ready to vote on the amendment.
Mayor Peterson,
Aye.
Councilman Thurley,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Iden, Borzakowski,
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Motion carries. Any discussion on the main motion? If not, we'll vote on that by roll call.
Mayor Peterson,
Aye.
Councilman Thurley,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Iden, Borzakowski,
Nay.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-1.
Moving on to item 5.10. This is the Bluff Traverse Natural Resources Management Plan.
Councilmember Schollmeyer moved to adopt the plan.
George will second that.
Okay, motion by Paul and seconded by George. Chad?
Mayor and Council, I'll attempt to share my screen here and just give a brief presentation. As we alluded to in the agenda item, we'll do an executive summary in response to the presentation that Bar Engineering did this past February. So as I mentioned briefly, the city hired Bar Engineering to conduct the Bluffs Traverse Conservation and Recreation Area Natural Resources Management Plan. They did present to the council the draft plan in February. We did receive public feedback, and then again tonight we'll provide you with an executive summary. The study area that was conducted was from Sugarloaf to Bluffside Park. And again, adjacent to St. Mary's University property, or really into St. Mary's University property. The vision is to preserve the unique character and ecological quality of the natural resource while making it sustainably accessible for people to enjoy. And that, I think it's important that we point that out because we certainly know that people use this area and it certainly is used heavily, especially during this COVID time. Bar conducted natural resources inventory and assessment. And so what they did is they did conduct a plant community inventory, observe trends in the ecological systems, assess rare and unique species within the Bluff Traverse. They looked at the physical features, topography, ravines, and of course bluffs, and then did the ecological quality. And during the ecological quality, they developed a community ranking. And it may be hard to see on your screen, but there's 3 different areas that they developed in their ranking system. And if you can see it well enough, it might be, again, maybe hard to see, but they're green, which means those are some areas that we should protect. B means to, the yellow areas means to restore, and the pinkish reddish color is where development is feasible and has the lowest quality of again, in an ecological sense. BAR then did look at issues and opportunities within the Bluff Traverse and really focused primarily on the issues, and that's the deer overabundance, the logging that took place at Woodlawn, of course, the invasive plant species that are within the Bluff Traverse, specifically shrub encroachment on bluff prairies, gully erosion. They did touch on climate change and earthworms. They addressed the fact that we haven't really necessarily had a past natural resources management plan, and of course the impact that people are having on this area, which is a good segue to, as we mentioned, the high use of this area and trail placement. The primary thought process here is that we need to have thoughtful design when we're placing trails within the Bluff Traverse. And in that thoughtful design, we need to focus on repairing areas impacted by erosion while protecting high quality plant communities. The city should consider using IMBA and follow those standards that are held by IMBA when we're doing placement and construction. The city should consider restricting trail use in certain areas and again, in certain conditions like when it's wet in the spring. The city should consider new trails that direct people away from sensitive habitats and establish and/or close trails that direct people away from sensitive cliffs. I will also note that during February, during the presentation, BAR mentioned that another idea on thoughtful design was to have BAR involved in our design, trail design plan. And one of the comments during that pre-council meeting was to have BAR on site when and if we construct trails. And we'll touch on this in the next agenda item as well. We did have BAR on site recently to review our flagging during our design period. And so we've taken one step above them being here during construction and had them come during the design process. BAR then did provide the city some implementation planning. And the way they do that is through, again, as I mentioned, through this trail placement. They give us guidelines on that follow the previous quality rankings that talk about areas that it may be good to avoid new trail construction, or if trail construction has to happen in those areas, how to do that. Careful, again, trail placement, and again, those areas that will be preferred for new trails. And again, that goes into more of what I just mentioned about the implementation and management recommendations. And really, it's the regeneration of these areas. The priorities are to address the deer population, again, manage invasive species that are within this area, and discontinue the logging at Woodlawn Cemetery, and restore native plants to that impacted area. As part of that regeneration strategy, BAR also then pointed out to the city and illustrates through this map the areas of high quality and where to start some of our regeneration strategies. They certainly would like us to start in those high quality core areas and work our way out. They did recommend that we do an independent restoration effort to repair the damage at Woodlawn, which is in the yellow areas, if you can see it on the map. And then again, as I mentioned, to expand restoration concurrent with the deer management plan. And again, those implementation strategies discuss securing funding, which again, the next agenda item we'll talk about in more detail. Again, a strategy on how and whom will conduct the regeneration process, conduct an annual assessment of the area, and again, review annually our progress. I'll leave with this concluding statement from BAR that's in the report. They state that the Bluff Traverse is being loved to death, meaning through active use, which is encouraged, these places are being damaged. Funding for management restoration should be a priority. Simple actions like appropriate trail placements can have a great effect on the Bluff Traverse. So with that, if there are any questions, I'd be certainly willing to take them. And again, I think you've already got the motion on the table.
Okay. Any questions or comments?
Yes, Mayor, this is Pam.
Go ahead, Pam.
Yes, thank you, Chad. We've really come a long way on this bluff traverse plan. But I come back to something kind of simple. When you were talking in the beginning, you said there were certain areas that should be protected, certain areas to be restored, and so forth. What in terms of this plan and in terms of the land, what does protection mean? Does it mean that we keep people off of it? Close the trails that may now traverse through this sensitive, protectable area? That's my question.
Mayor and council, I'm actually going to get into this next council item, but I'll give you the two examples, Pam, and then you're going to see some more detail about that. And the two examples, I guess, that I would give is the Sugarloaf area. We closed off the South Trail. And what we saw happening was people wanted to get to the base of Sugarloaf and in many cases to the top. But people were scrambling up the south side, and that was having damaging effects to our resources. And so we closed that south trail and developed a north trail that can access the base of Sugarloaf, and that's been effective. You're going to see here in a minute, really within the bluff, also within the bluff traverse, is the Devil's Cave area. It is a high quality area. We know that people go there. We know that people are continuing to go there, and they're scrambling to get there. There's not a dedicated trail to get to Devil's Cave. And so people are taking the shortest distance between 2 points, and a lot of times that means straight up the hill and through some of high quality natural resource areas. And so certainly, again, closing access to the destinations and providing a single out and back trail or loop, or a single loop trail to that destination is one simple thing that we believe we can do that isn't too costly to help preserve that area.
Thank you. I'll wait till the next item also. Thank you.
Councilmember Schollmeyer.
Go ahead, Paul.
So I just want to, I guess, wow is how I would reply to this document. I think it's extremely important. You know, we all realize how important outdoor recreation is to our community and to our residents. I will say, in regards to Chad's last comment from Bar about the trails being loved to death, I live in this neighborhood. I use the trails. I go up to Sugarloaf regularly. I will say that the number of cars parked out there and using that north trailhead now compared to before is magnitude numbers of times higher than before. And we have quite an attraction with Sugarloaf and this trailhead and this potential here. I think this document really goes a long ways toward making it an area that we can love and protect for future generations.
Al, with a few comments here.
Go ahead, Al.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I agree with Councilperson Schollmeyer that the document was just really fun. I think fun to read. For me, it was kind of a historic document as things started and laid out from the beginning of time, essentially for the whole area. And as a kid in the 50s and 60s, I of course spent a lot of time along the bluffs, and obviously it's been a long time since I've been there since. But I can understand the comment about many other people wanting to be up there as well. And I think the trails are the right way to go to allow that to happen for more and more people. I do have, I understand perhaps later on in the process of once this gets going and we get some grant money in, and this was just for the natural resources management plan. I want to make sure that as we go forward, that we recognize the historic potential for Native American sites that may or may not be in part of the areas along here. And I think that's one of the key elements that we can do to support the folks that lived on the island well before the Europeans came. So thank you.
Chad, do you want to address the archaeological aspects of this?
Mayor and Council, I believe we touched on this briefly in February. The city did conduct an archaeological study in the Bluff Traverse as well. We hired the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse to do that study. I do have that report, and they were ready to give a presentation to the council. And again, then COVID struck, and we can recircle back with them to see if they'd be willing to do it through Zoom. But that study is complete, and we'll note that in our application as well.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, Eileen here.
Go ahead, Eileen.
I had some questions actually similar to what Councilman Thurley said. And this is more of a request. This document is wonderful. It has so much great information, lots of charts, which I love. But there's a very brief history piece, which I realize as far as trails and park rec goes is not always the top priority. But as Al mentioned, it seems to take for granted that history starts when white people arrived in Winona. And I just want to make sure that since we as a city have tried to have a good relationship with the Dakota people, that if any efforts we can make towards acknowledging the history of the city, and as we get to the point where we have perhaps new wayfinding signs or things like that around the trails, that there can be some context available for people using the trails so that they understand the significance of this area and its history going back further than the 1830s. So just a request.
Thank you. Any other comments? I guess we're ready to vote by roll call.
Mayor Peterson.
Aye.
Councilman Thurley.
Aye.
Moeller.
Aye.
Iden. Aye. Borzakowski.
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Carries.
Item 5.11 is the Bluff Traverse 2020 Legacy Grant Application.
Councilmember Schollmeyer moves to go ahead with the application.
Eileen, I second.
Okay, we have a motion from Paul and a second from Eileen. Chad.
Mayor and Council, just want to start by saying that Alicia, the recreation coordinator, outdoor recreation coordinator for the city of Winona, is here with me tonight as well. I'm going to give you an overview of the application more from the sense of the department. And then if you have any specific questions, either Alicia or I can certainly address them. So the city did hire IMBA, as I alluded to in the bar report. We did go right to IMBA to create a concept design for the trail system. That included a field design as well. And that field design includes a flagging system that IMBA does. It's basically another word to say that is a conceptual to schematic design, but in this case, they're on the ground and flagging. And then they will create for us what equates to basically construction documents if we're successful going forward with our application. So the focus has been on Bluffside Park. However, we continue to explore Garvin Heights and Sugarloaf, basically where we are seeing the high attendance numbers, as Councilman Schollmeyer and others have mentioned. We are using IMBA and their trail building standards as outlined in the management plan. And again, I can't say this enough. I think every time I present this to you, I say the following, but it's important to note again, these are not only mountain bike trails. These are shared use trails. There are bike only trails and there are hike only trails as well. So it's important to note that this is not simply a mountain bike trail project. So again, IMBA was on site last month and this past winter. And this past month, they began to flag primarily in the Bluffside Park area. We're about to show you a lot of maps that are going to have a lot of lines and a lot of zones. But the key here is to focus on the highlighted areas as they represent our 2020 application. And again, under the context of the Natural Resources Management Plan in conjunction with IMBA. So again, probably difficult to see this map. It has a lot of detail. This is the Bluffside Park area. And I'm going to zoom in here in a minute, but we're going to focus on the darker area that's on the eastern side of this map. So this is really just a zoom in of the area. And again, this may be hard to see on your screen, but I'll give you, hopefully you can see my arrow. Just to give you some context, this is really the edge of the Dahl parking lot. This is really what we typically call low rollers in the Holsinger area. This is really specifically Bluffside Park. And this area, this 3 here where I have my arrow is Stone Circle. Hopefully you can see this a little bit better, but starting at Stone Circle in our 2020 application, we'll propose this trail 102, this yellow highlighted trail that zigzags to the top of the bluff area. It should be noted that this is a shared use trail. This will provide trail access to the top of the bluff. This trail is on an upper section of a bluff prairie. So there is a bluff prairie in this section here where my arrow is, and we have gone on the upper side of that bluff prairie, and this trail is all within city property. The second highlighted trail is just as a reference is called 105 on the screen. Again, if we work from Stone Circle and go to the top and work our way down, this is a bike optimized trail. So this is a bike only trail. And this trail creates a downhill option. And again, this trail is within city property. So as we mentioned briefly before, in the management plan, another area that is of concern for us, and probably difficult to see on this screen, but if you can see my arrow, this is the Devil's Cave area. So we are planning as well, in this larger yellow highlighted area, to ask for some restoration and regeneration dollars within our legacy application. And as Councilwoman Iden had mentioned, this is one of those areas where at this time, there's really no specific trail. As I mentioned before, we see people scrambling to get to Devil's Cave without much direction. So we will add some restoration for this area in our application. And then I'm going to provide some more detail here in a minute regarding Devil's Cave. So again, how does this relate to the Natural Resources Management Plan? We obviously will reference the management plan in our application. That is something that isn't necessarily required, but is highly recommended. So we take that basically as a requirement. And again, as BAR has provided, they have given us guidelines for trail placement. As I mentioned earlier, we did have BAR attend and review the flagging that was being done by IMBA last month to make sure that we were meeting those IMBA standards and placement, even though we are not constructing or restoring at this time. We're simply in the design phase. So I'll go over these quickly, but I think they're important to note. BAR then, after their site visit, provided us this information. They had some concerns about the bluff prairies, which you'll see here in a map in a minute. It's called Zone A. They wanted to make sure the city does not bisect the bluff prairie, that if trail development happens in this area, that the city use the upper edge of the bluff prairie, and then to conduct invasive control. So the image to your right is a area that was flagged. It does have invasive species. Those shrubs in this photo are invasive. So again, the idea here is go through the invasive area, remove those invasives, and have that trail on the upper edge of the bluff prairie. So zone A, there are 2 bluff prairies. There is one in this area, which is closest to Woodlawn. So that we are not applying for any trail development in this area in our 2020 application. However, there is a bluff prairie that we just referred to in this area that is, I guess, just south of some private property, but within the city property. And again, this is where we'll do some invasive control and again, reroute this trail so it does not bisect the bluff prairie. They mentioned concerns about the native woodland, which is zone B, that they would recommend that the city have these be hiking trails only. If that is not possible, then we would still use some bike trails through there, that the new trails be placed carefully with boardwalks and or homemade trails, or handmade trails, sorry. So zone B is this area just south of Devil's Cave, where my arrow, I think hopefully you can see that moving. That's area B. Again, we are not applying for any trail development in this area in our 2020 application. So get into some more detail about Devil's Cave, which is zone C. BAR in their latest memo after the flagging had referred to Devil's Cave area as a web of destructive trails. Again, this is the most diverse and sensitive plant communities in this area. They are recommending the city remove trails that are redundant or unstable trails. And their recommendation would be to create trails to guide people to the destination away from plant communities. So as I mentioned, that's this plant community area here in section C. Again, within this map, this Devil's Cave area. It's very hard to see on this map, but if you can see my arrow, we have a lot of people just scrambling straight up, if you follow my arrow, to Devil's Cave. What we would propose is closing some of those sections off. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, creating one single out and back trail or potentially a loop to get people in and out of Devil's Cave appropriately without, again, that scramble. BAR did mention this area called Zone D, which is the forested wetland. They had concerns about the city developing trails that encircled this area. And this zone is on private property where we have no formal agreement. So that is in this area here. Again, I'll make note that we are not applying for any trail development in this section D in our 2020 application. And we have eliminated the encircling concept of a trail within our flagging design. BAR has mentioned Zone E, which is in erosion-prone areas. This is where stormwater runoff from neighborhood is negatively impacting trails and plants. Their recommendation is to stabilize the existing trails in this area. And again, new trails should be carefully designed. This is that section E is this larger red circle in the Windcrest neighborhood. So this is where we see a lot of erosion issues. Again, we are not in our 2020 application applying for any restoration or trail development in that area. As I mentioned earlier, though, we are looking at 2 other areas within our 2020 application that are not directly in Bluffs Park, but obviously within the Bluff or Bluffside Park, but within the Bluff Traverse, and that's the Garvin Heights area. So we do have a trail connector to the overlook that comes up from Winona State property, typically called the Garvin Heights Trail. That's stairs up to the overlook from Lake Boulevard. But a portion of that trail is on city property, so we want to begin to do some connector work there, meaning signage. Same goes for the area that is adjacent to the Kruger Woods, which is also Winona State property. A small portion of that is on city property. And again, we'd like to start with some signage there and begin a trail connection to that trail segment. We also would be proposing a trail adjacent to the road from East Garvin Heights to the lookout that would be pedestrian based. Again, Sugarloaf is also an area that we'd like to address in our 2020 application. Primarily, it's trail upgrades for access to our outdoor recreation. So you're all well aware. These trails provide access to our Sugarloaf and the Ice Park climbing wall. Again, this is a mixed use of shared use trails and hike only. In one of the proposals, there is a bike only segment, but that is not being included in our 2020 application. It's just those trails in yellow you see here on this map. So the action item before you tonight, of course, has a funding requirement. We are going to request up to $700,000 in our legacy grant application in 2020. In 2019, we asked for $1.8 million. Of course, we were unsuccessful in getting that grant. In our conversations, excuse me, with the legacy folks, certainly with sales tax down due to COVID, that's the primary funding source for legacy dollars. So we're aware that we needed to reduce the amount that we applied for this year. We also got good feedback that we needed to increase our match, and that increasing our cash match would certainly help our points that go to our overall application. So tonight before you, we have a request to match up to $140,000 as a cash match. Again, 12 coming from the Winona Area Mountain Bike group that you approved at the last meeting. We're asking for $12,000 from our park fund that was recently established. We are asking for $56,000 from the Garvin Fund, that is a reserve fund within the city that can be used for improvements in the Garvin Heights overlook area. And again, we're asking for $60,000 from the facilities fund. Again, if there are any questions about our application or the presentation, I'd be happy to take them.
Chad, when is this application due?
Mayor and Council, it's due July 31st.
Okay. And when will you hear?
We likely would hear in November, December is typically the time frame we find out.
Okay. Any other questions from council?
Councilmember Fuller.
Oh, go ahead, Paul.
I just want to, again, thank the Winona Area Mountain Bikers for their donation to help us reach our match. Just another example of the many different collaborative efforts that the city does for parks and recreation and outdoor recreation. There are numerous organizations and that help us do this. This is just another example. I just wanted to acknowledge them.
Okay. Anybody else?
Al here with a question, Mayor.
Go ahead, Al.
I guess this is mainly directed to the city manager. How does the facilities fund look as far as being able to provide these funds?
Assuming we won't draw on until next year. Right now, I believe that money is in there.
Okay.
Mayor and Council, Chad Dubois. Al, I believe when we did the 2019 financial report, the facility fund had a balance of roughly, I think it was 2.1 million.
Yep.
Certainly some funds, very limited funds, went back into that fund in 2019. And we certainly haven't drawn significant dollars out of that in 2020. And again, as the city manager pointed out, if the grant application is approved, these would be likely taken out in 2021 or 2022.
Mm-hmm. Well, our next request also draws upon those funds too, but I'm glad to know that. Thank you.
Any other comments? If not, we'll vote.
Mayor Peterson,
Aye.
Councilman Thurley,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Iden,
Aye.
Worzakowski,
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Item 5.12 is the Masonic Temple exterior project change order request.
Councilmember Schollmeyer moved to approve the change order request.
Eileen,
Iden
second.
Seconds.
Motion by Paul and seconded by Eileen. Any comments? We'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Peterson,
Aye.
Councilman Thurley,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Iden,
Aye.
Worzakowski,
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Motion carried.
Item 5.13 is to move the polling site for Ward 2, Precinct 1.
George will so move to approve that change.
Eileen, second.
Motion by George, seconded by Eileen. Any discussion? We'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Peterson,
Aye.
Councilman Thurley,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Iden,
Aye.
Worzakowski,
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Item 7.1 is council concerns.
We'll start with Paul tonight.
Well, lickety splickety, I have nothing this evening.
All right. We'll go to George.
Thank you. I would just like to say a happy retirement to Mary Brichter. She is one of the best, if not the best, finance director in the state of Minnesota. My whole council career has been with her, and I thought she did a phenomenal job for the city of Winona, and wish her very much health and success in her retirement. And also, I'd just like to send out condolences to the family of Linda Hoyleman, to her son Joe, Linda, who passed away a week ago, and they will carry on. Thank you.
Okay. Pam?
Yes, Mayor. I would like to request that that the city come up with some ordinances, one or more ordinances to cover boulevard prairies and front yard prairies. Several times in the last couple of years, I've called the city because people have found that the inspector or someone wants them to cut down all of their prairie plants in August after they've carefully nurtured them throughout the whole year. Right now, that is left, I guess, to the inspector to decide if it constitutes a nuisance or it needs to be removed. Since the city has signed the pollinator resolution, and we are in favor of promoting pollinators and promoting plants that help pollinators, I'd like to see the city be more clear with people about what they can plant, where, and how high it can be. There are quite a few ordinances available to use as models, and I think that would send a good message if we come up with these ordinances and promote them and teach people how to manage their yards in a safe way. That would be a good thing. I have also one more thing, and that is that at the end of June, the city lost a colorful personality. Dorothy Rick, who was born and raised in Winona and lived here her entire life, was known to many people, but to a lot of us, she was that intrepid bicycle rider who loved vivid colors and was usually accompanied by one or more enormous and exotic dogs. So she has died, and I'd like to wish condolences to her family, and I know she'll be missed by many people.
All right, thank you, Pam. Eileen?
Thanks. I know that there's been information sent to council about this, and that the public is aware of an incident that happened at Maplewood last week where a military style vehicle was brought in for an incident. Our officers did what they are supposed to do. They did their jobs well. But I've gotten a lot of emails about whether or not what we ask of the officers in a situation like that is appropriate considering what the situation was. I don't have a good answer for that. I know we've had a lot of discussions internally about it, but I mostly just wanted to mention it because there were several citizens who specifically asked me to bring attention to it. To invite us to consider if in the future there are different ways that we can deal with similar situations that don't involve bringing a military style vehicle into a small neighborhood where there are children and lots of people are traumatized by an event like that. It was resolved peacefully, so to speak. But I do think I think that we're having a lot of questions nationally right now about how we police people and what we ask our police forces to do. We ask our police officers to do a lot of different things. Everything from finding lost pets all the way up to dealing with domestic assault. And it's a lot of different things. And so I think that, as a city, we're taking a look at how we can better equip our officers and have them deal with the issues that they truly should be dealing with, and whether or not we can find other resources to deal with things that are not as high stress. So I just want to put that out there that I heard that and I'm having conversations about it. And also, this was mentioned earlier today, but I do want to thank Sarah Johnson for the beautiful piece of art she created at HCO. I look forward to seeing a lot more colorful pieces of public art around our city. I think it's a wonderful, beautiful addition. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And last, Al.
Nothing tonight, Mayor.
Okay.
Under the consent agenda, there is one item, the approval of the minutes from July 6th.
Move to approve the consent agenda.
I would second
that.
Motion by Al, seconded by Pam. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Peterson,
Aye.
Councilman Thurley,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Iden,
Aye.
Borzakowski,
Aye.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
Carries.
Mayor, I hate to bring this up, but I move we adjourn.
I second.
No, I don't know. I think we should, no. All right, we have a motion and a second. We'll vote by roll call.
Mayor Peterson,
Aye.
Councilman Thurley,
Aye.
Moeller,
Aye.
Iden,
Aye.
Borzakowski,
Please.
Schollmeyer.
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Thank you, everybody.